What if the most hated child of Konoha was not just a normal child, possessing an art and ability that wasn't supposed to exist, that allowed him to defy odds by manipulating his own blood in ways that could be considered monstrous? But what happened when he learned to manipulate blood within others? Well, if you want to see, just sit back, relax, and enjoy, guys.
The night the Nine Tails attacked the Hidden Leaf Village, the sky turned red. People ran through the streets screaming. Buildings crumbled like paper. The massive fox, tall enough to scrape the clouds, tore through everything in its path with 9 enormous tails that moved like whips made of pure destruction. Entire squads of ninja were sent flying. The ground split open wherever those tails crashed down. Fire spread across rooftops. Children cried, parents grabbed their little ones and ran, not knowing where to go, not knowing if anywhere was safe. And standing at the edge of all of that chaos, alone on a hill with the village burning behind him, was the 4th Hokage. Minato Namikaze, the fastest man alive, the yellow flash of Konoha. He looked at the monster destroying everything he loved, and he made a choice that no father should ever have to make. He looked down at the small baby in his arms, a tiny thing, barely days old, with a little bit of blonde hair and the faintest hint of whisker marks on his cheeks. The baby was not crying. He was just looking up at his father with big blue eyes, like he was waiting to see what would happen next. Minato held him a little tighter. He kissed his son on the forehead, and then he used the most forbidden and most powerful sealing technique in existence to trap the 9 tails inside that small, perfect, innocent child. The cost of that technique was his own life. His wife, Kushina Uzumaki, had already given everything she had trying to hold the beast down. She was gone moments after the seal was complete, and so, in the span of one single night, a boy named Naruto Uzumaki lost both of his parents before he was even old enough to understand what parents were. He was left alone in a world that was still smoking and broken. A world that would soon learn what was sealed inside him. A world that would decide, without ever asking him, that he was not a child. He was a monster. The 3rd Hokage, a kind old man named Hiruzen Sarutobi, tried his best to protect Naruto. He gave the boy a small apartment on the edge of the village. He made sure there was food. He put rules in place that said nobody was allowed to talk about what was sealed inside the boy, hoping that if people did not know, they would treat him normally. But secrets have a way of spreading no matter how tightly you try to hold them. And hatred has a way of traveling through a village like a sickness, passing from parent to child, from neighbor to neighbor, until everyone is infected and nobody even remembers where it started. Naruto was 3 years old the first time he really understood that the village hated him. He had gone to a small shop to buy a bowl of ramen, because even at 3 years old, ramen was the one thing that made him feel something close to happy. He had climbed up onto the stool at the counter, put his coins down, and waited with a big smile on his face. The man behind the counter looked at him. His face went tight, his eyes went cold. He took Naruto's coins, slid a bowl across the counter, and said nothing. Not a single word, not even a look that said he saw a child sitting there. He just turned his back and started cleaning something that was not dirty. Naruto ate his ramen alone. He told himself it was fine. He told himself people were just busy. He was 3 years old. He still wanted to believe that people were good. That belief did not last much longer. It was a few weeks after the ramen shop that everything changed. Naruto had wandered a little too far from his apartment. He was just walking, the way little kids do when there is nothing else to do and nobody to play with. He ended up near a part of the village where a group of older men were sitting outside a building, drinking and talking loudly. One of them saw him. The man stood up. His eyes went from tired and bored to something hot and ugly in the space of a single second. He said a word, not Naruto, not boy, a word that Naruto did not fully understand yet, but that carried a weight that hit him right in the chest like a stone. The other men stood up too. Naruto ran. He was fast for a 3-year-old, small and light, and for a moment he thought he might make it back to his apartment. But they were faster, grown men, drunk, and full of something that had been building inside them for 3 years with nowhere to go. They caught him in an alley. Naruto would not remember every detail of what happened next. Some things are too painful for even the mind to hold onto. What he would remember was the ground, the cold, wet stone of the alley floor, the sound of his own breathing, fast and shallow, the burning in his side where something had broken, and then something else, something he had never felt before. It started as a strange warmth, not the warmth of comfort, but the warmth of something waking up. Like a fire that had been sleeping inside him his whole life and had finally found enough air to breathe. He could feel them, not just hear them or see them. He could feel them, all three of the men who were hurting him. He could feel something moving inside their bodies, something warm and red and alive, pumping and pushing through them in steady rivers. He did not have the words for it yet. He was 3 years old, but some part of him understood anyway. He could feel their blood, every drop of it, in their arms, in their chests, in the veins along their necks and the backs of their hands. He could feel it moving, feel the rhythm of it, and he could feel, with a certainty that went deeper than thought, that he could reach into that rhythm and change it. He did not decide to do what happened next. It simply happened. One of the men suddenly grabbed his own arm and screamed. Not an angry scream, a terrified one, the kind of scream that comes from pain you cannot explain or understand. He stumbled backwards, staring at his arm like it had betrayed him, and then he ran. The second man saw his friend run and looked down at Naruto with wide eyes. And then he felt it too, a sudden, crushing pressure in his head, like something was squeezing from the inside. He made a sound that was not quite a word and stumbled after the first man. The third man, the one who had called Naruto that word, stood very still for a moment. He looked at the small bleeding child on the ground. He looked at his own hands. And then he felt something warm running down from his nose. He touched his face. He looked at his fingers. He ran faster than the other two. Naruto lay in the alley alone for a long time after that. He was hurting. He was scared. But underneath the pain and the fear, something else was growing. Something quiet and new, like a seed that had just cracked open in the dark. Anbu found him eventually, masked ninja moving through shadows, called by some alert or patrol. They brought him back to the Hokage. The third sat across from the small boy and asked him what had happened. Naruto did not know how to explain it. He barely understood it himself. He said the men ran away. He said he did not know why. The old Hokage looked at him for a long time. His eyes were sad and tired and full of something that might have been guilt. He told Naruto he would be safe now. He promised. Naruto nodded and said nothing. He had already started to understand that promises from the village meant very little. Over the next year, Naruto practiced. He did not call it practicing. He did not call it anything. He simply did the thing he had discovered he could do, quietly and alone. The way children teach themselves things when there is no one to teach them. He started with small animals, mice mostly, and the occasional rat that wandered through the walls of his apartment building. He would sit very still in the corner of his room, eyes half closed, and reach out with that feeling, that warm internal sense that had no name yet, until he found the tiny, fast heartbeat of a mouse somewhere in the walls. Then he would touch it, not physically, with something else, something that lived behind his eyes and underneath his skin. He would press against the current of the animal's blood, gentle at first, just feeling how it worked. And then he would push. He learned quickly that pushing too hard ended things. He did not like ending things. That was not what interested him. What interested him was the control. The way he could make the mouse turn left or right by squeezing one side of the vessels in its legs. The way he could slow it down by tightening something deeper inside it. The way he could, if he was very careful and very precise, make it sit completely still, frozen in place, while its little heart kept beating. Control. That was the word he eventually found for what he wanted. By the time Naruto was 4 years old, feel every living thing within about 30 feet of him. Not perfectly, not with total clarity, but well enough. He could feel the Anbu who sometimes watched his apartment, their steady heartbeats on the rooftop across the street. He could feel the old woman who lived 2 doors down, her slow and tired rhythm. He could feel the cats that prowled the alley. He never touched the people, not yet. He was not sure why he held back. Maybe some small part of him was still hoping things would get better on their own. Still hoping the village might change. That part of him died on a night in early spring, just before his 5th birthday. He had gone to the small market near his apartment to buy vegetables, which he hated but ate because they were cheap and he was always running low on the money the Hokage provided. A group of children from the academy had been there with their parents. Naruto had tried to smile at one of them, a boy about his age with dark hair. The boy's mother had grabbed her son by the arm and pulled him away before he could respond. She had not said anything to Naruto. She had not looked at him. She had simply removed her child from his presence the way you remove something from something dangerous. The other parents did the same. one by one, pulling their children close, turning away, clearing the space around Naruto until he was standing alone in the middle of the market with a bag of vegetables in his hands and a circle of empty air around him that might as well have been a wall. He walked home, he put the vegetables away. He sat on the floor of his apartment and stared at the wall for a very long time. Then he stood up. He went to the small wooden box under his bed where he kept the little bit of money he had saved. He counted it carefully. He found an old backpack in the closet. He filled it with food, the money, an extra set of clothes, and a small knife he had taken from the kitchen. He did not leave a note. There was no one to leave it for. He waited until after midnight, when the village was quiet and even the ambu had shifted positions. He had spent weeks learning their patterns without them knowing. He knew exactly when the gap in their watch opened and for how long. He slipped out through his window, dropped down to the alley below, and walked toward the main gate of Konoha. He was 4 years old. He was small and he was hurt in ways that had nothing to do with the body. And he walked out of the village that was supposed to be his home without looking back a single time. The road outside Konoha was long and dark and full of sounds that a 4-year-old alone at night had no business hearing. Naruto walked anyway. He followed the main road heading toward the Land of Fire's interior, staying close to the tree lines so he could duck into the forest if he heard anyone coming. He did not know where he was going. He did not have a plan. He had a backpack and a knife and a power he did not fully understand yet, and he had made the decision that whatever was out here in the dark was better than what he had left behind. For 3 days, nothing much happened. He slept in the trees. He ate sparingly. He found a stream and drank from it. He was cold at night and tired during the day and his feet hurt almost constantly. But he kept moving. On the 4th day, he heard voices ahead on the road. He stopped and pressed himself against a tree, reaching out with his sense before he could even think about it. He found them immediately, 7 heartbeats, all strong and fast in the way that people who spend a lot of time moving and fighting tend to be. They were close, maybe 200 feet around the next bend in the road. Naruto thought about going around through the forest. He looked at the thick undergrowth and the roots and the shadows between the trees. Then he thought about how tired his legs already were. He stayed on the road. He came around the bend and walked right into a group of 7 bandits who were in the middle of eating lunch around a small fire. For a moment, everyone just stared at each other. The bandits were rough-looking men, scarred and dirty, with weapons at their belts and the kind of eyes that had seen enough bad things that more bad things did not particularly bother them anymore. Their leader was a big man named Ryota, broad across the shoulders with a beard that had not been trimmed in a long time. He was chewing on a piece of dried meat and looking at the small blonde child who had just appeared on the road in front of him with an expression of complete confusion. One of the other men laughed. He said something about someone losing their kid. Ryota did not laugh. He was watching Naruto with narrow eyes. Something about the child was off. He could not say exactly what. Just a feeling, the kind a man gets after spending years doing dangerous things. A feeling that said be careful. He asked Naruto where he came from. Naruto said nowhere. He asked where Naruto was going. Naruto said he did not know yet. Ryota looked at the backpack. He looked at the small knife tucked into Naruto's belt. He looked at the boy's face and the whisker marks on his cheeks and the blue eyes that were watching him back without any fear. Just that strange, flat calm. He told Naruto to sit down. He said they would share their food and then figure out what to do with him. Naruto sat down. He was hungry enough that he did not argue about the figure out what to do with him part. He ate. The men talked around him, not really including him but not chasing him away either. Ryota kept watching him from across the fire. After a while, one of the younger bandits leaned over and grabbed Naruto's backpack. He said he wanted to see what was in it. His tone made it clear he was not really asking. Naruto looked at him, looked at the hand on his bag, looked back at the man's face. He found the man's blood. He wrapped his focus around the vessels in the man's hand, the ones running along the back of the fingers, and he squeezed. The man made a sound like he had been punched and yanked his hand back. He stared at his fingers. They had gone white, almost gray, and were trembling. The color came back slowly, flooding back in a way that looked almost wrong, too red, too fast. Complete silence around the fire. Every man was staring at Naruto. Some of them had their hands on their weapons. Some of them looked ready to run. Ryota had not moved at all. He was still watching with those narrow eyes, but something in his expression had shifted. He no longer looked confused. He looked interested. He asked Naruto how he did that. Naruto said it was just something he could do. Rayado was quiet for a long moment. Then he asked how strong it was. He asked if Naruto could do more than that. Naruto thought about the mice. He thought about the 3 men in the alley. He thought about all the hours of practice in his small, empty apartment. He looked at Ryota and said he thought he could do quite a bit more. Ryota nodded slowly. He leaned back and looked up at the sky for a moment like he was thinking something over. Then he looked back at Naruto and made him an offer. He said Naruto could travel with them. He said they would give him food, shelter, protection. In return, Naruto would use his ability when they needed it. He said it simply and without any warmth, but also without any cruelty. Like a transaction, like business, Naruto thought about his empty apartment. He thought about the market and the circle of space that appeared around him wherever he went. He thought about 4 days of sleeping in trees and eating dried food alone in the dark. He said yes, what happened over the next year and a half was not a story of a boy being taught kindness or saved by good people. Ryota and his men were not good people. They robbed travelers. They threatened villages. They took what they wanted and moved on before anyone could organize a proper response. But they fed Naruto, they gave him a place to sleep, and in their rough, practical way, they treated him like something that existed, which was more than the village had done. And Naruto learned. He learned how to use his power with more precision than he had ever managed alone. He practiced on the men themselves, at first only when they asked him to and then more often on his own, sitting off to the side of camp at night while everyone else slept, reaching out into the dark forest with his senses. He could feel everything now within a much wider range, animals, people, anything with blood moving through it. He could feel the difference between a resting heartbeat and a frightened one. He could feel sickness in a person's body, the slow, wrong rhythm of it. He could feel when someone was lying, because their pulse changed in a way that was small but undeniable. He could not explain how he knew these things. He just knew them, the way a bird knows how to fly without anyone teaching it the mechanics. By the end of that first year, he could control 3 people at once. Not perfectly, it required a lot of focus and it was tiring in a way that went deeper than physical tiredness. But he could do it. He could make a man drop his weapon by tightening the muscles in his hand from the inside. He could give someone a crushing headache that went away the moment he chose to let it go. He could, if he was being honest with himself, do quite a bit worse than that. He chose not to. For now, Ryota was smart enough to understand what he had found. He started using Naruto strategically. When they approached a merchant convoy, Naruto would walk ahead alone, small and blonde and apparently harmless, while the others waited in the trees. And Naruto would reach out and feel the guards, feel their weapons and their heartbeats, and by the time Ryota's men stepped out onto the road, those guards were already pale-faced and sweating, their hands shaking for reasons they could not explain, their bodies betraying them without a single weapon being drawn. Nobody got badly hurt. Ryota preferred it that way. Hurt people drew attention, scared people moved on and kept quiet. But Naruto began to notice something. When he used his power on someone, particularly when he used it to cause them pain or fear, there was a feeling that came with it. Not guilt, not satisfaction exactly, something in between those two things that had no clean name. A feeling of being real, of existing, of mattering. Because when you could feel someone else's blood moving and you could change it, they could not ignore you. They could not look through you. They could not pull their children away from you and pretend you were not there. They saw you, they were terrified of you, but they saw you, and something in Naruto, the part that had been invisible for 4 years, drank that in like water. It was near the end of his second year with the group that things shifted. The group had grown by then. Word had spread in the quiet way that word spreads among criminals, about the small blonde child who traveled with Ryota's crew. The child with the strange eyes. The one who could make your hands stop working without touching you. The one who had once, according to a story that had gotten bigger every time it was told, made a trained shinobi bleed from his ears just by looking at him. That last part was not entirely true, but it was not entirely false either. New men had joined. The group was now 16 strong. Some of them looked at Naruto with fear. Some looked at him with greed, like he was a weapon they wanted access to. A few looked at him with something that might have been respect, the kind hard men gave to other dangerous things. None of them looked at him the way the village had looked at him. Like he was nothing. The moment things shifted happened on a dusty road outside a small farming town. A merchant had been moving through with a cart of goods. He was a fat, loud man with a red face and 2 hired guards who were clearly just there for appearances. Ryota approached him. The merchant had heard of the group. He knew paying was easier than refusing. But this man decided to be brave. He said he would not pay. He said they were common criminals and he was protected by the daimyo's law, and if they touched him there would be consequences. His face was red and his voice was shaking, but he stood his ground. His guards looked extremely unhappy to be there. Ryato looked at Naruto. Naruto looked at the merchant. He found the man's blood immediately, loud and rushing, pumping fast with anger and fear that the man was working very hard to hide. He felt the guards too, both of them barely holding it together under their armor. He was about to do the usual thing, the quiet squeeze, the trembling hands, the headache that made a point without leaving marks. But something made him stop. He thought about the village market. He thought about that woman pulling her son away. He thought about 3 years of being invisible, of being nothing, of being the thing nobody wanted near them. He thought about how that merchant was doing the exact same thing right now. Looking right through him, deciding he was nothing. What he did next was not the usual thing. The merchant grabbed his own chest and made a sound like a man who has just been hit very hard. Both guards dropped their weapons at the exact same moment and clutched their heads, stumbling sideways. The merchant's cart horse reared up and screamed, pulling against its harness. And from the merchant's nose, both nostrils at once, blood began to run freely, slow and dark, dripping down over his lips and onto his fine clothes. It stopped the moment Naruto let it go, which he did after 5 seconds. Exactly 5, he counted. The merchant stared at him with the eyes of a man looking at something he cannot make sense of. He was trembling so badly he could barely stand. His hands went to his face, felt the blood, and he made a sound that was not a word. He reached into his cart and threw a bag of money onto the road. Then he whipped his horse and his cart rattled away so fast that one of the wheels nearly came off on the first corner. Ryato picked up the bag. He looked at it, he looked at Naruto. He said nothing for a moment. Then he said that was more than they usually got. Naruto looked at his hands. They were steady, his breathing was calm. Inside him, the feeling was there again, that feeling that had no name, but it was bigger this time. Fuller, like something that had been very hungry for a very long time had just been fed. He flexed his fingers slowly. He had made that man see him, really see him, not as a child, not as something to be ignored or hated from a safe distance. He had made that man look at him and understand, in a way that went past thinking and straight into the body, that Naruto Uzumaki existed. He was 5.5 years old. He was standing on a dirt road in the middle of nowhere with 16 criminals and a stolen bag of money and no home to go back to. And for the first time in his life, he felt something that might have been power. Real power, not the fox sealed inside him, which he barely thought about and could not control. His own power, the thing that lived in his hands and his mind and the space between his heartbeat and everyone else's. He picked up a small stone from the road. He rolled it around in his palm. He was starting to understand something that the village had tried to teach him the wrong way for years, though they never meant to teach him anything at all. The world was full of people, and people were full of blood, and blood listened to him. He dropped the stone, he picked up his pace and walked on ahead, leaving the others to follow. By the time Naruto was 6 years old, the group had 23 members. Men came looking for them now. Not lawmen, not hunters, criminals, desperate wanderers, ronin without masters, people who had heard the story of the child with the blood power and wanted to be on the right side of it. Ryato accepted some and turned others away, but the group kept growing. Naruto had settled into a strange kind of authority that nobody had officially given him and nobody challenged. He did not give orders. He did not run meetings. He simply was quiet and watchful at the center of the group, and everyone arranged themselves around that fact without needing to be told to. He had been practicing something new in the evenings. He had discovered, by accident, that his range was not fixed. It grew with focus, like a muscle. The more he pushed it, the further it reached. He could now feel every living creature within about 150 feet of him, a wide, invisible circle that moved with him wherever he went. Within that circle, he knew things. He knew how many people there were and roughly where they were and what their bodies were doing and whether they were afraid. He had also discovered something else, something that kept him up at night, turning it over in his mind. He could feel the 9 tails. Not always, not clearly, but sometimes, usually when he was very tired or very focused, he could feel something enormous living at the center of him. Something that burned like a second sun, all heat and pressure and ancient rage. When he touched it, even by accident, his power spiked suddenly, his range doubling, his control sharpening to a point that was almost frightening. He did not touch it on purpose. Not yet. He was not stupid. He knew what was inside him. He had figured it out slowly over the years, piecing together looks and whispers and the way adults flinched when he came too close. He knew there was a reason the village hated him, a reason that had nothing to do with anything he had done. He had decided he did not care, or at least, he was getting very good at telling himself that he did not care. On the last night of what he counted as his second year on the road, Naruto sat outside the camp while the others slept. The fire had burned down to embers. The forest was dark and full of quiet sounds. Above him, through the gaps in the trees, he could see stars. He stretched out his senses slowly, like opening a hand in the dark. He felt the 23 men sleeping around the camp. He felt 2 deer somewhere off to the east. He felt a hawk up in one of the taller pines, its fast, tiny heartbeat ticking away in the dark. He felt, far off in the direction he knew Konoha to be, the faint and distant warmth of thousands of people packed together in their houses. All those heartbeats, all that blood, moving through all those people who had decided, without ever knowing him, that he was nothing. He looked at that direction for a long time. He was not angry. That was the strange part. He had expected to be angry, and the anger was there somewhere underneath everything else. The way the fox was underneath everything else, hot and contained. But on the surface he was very calm, very clear. He was beginning to understand what he wanted. It was not complicated. It was actually the simplest thing in the world. He wanted to never be invisible again, and he was starting to understand exactly how to make sure of that. He looked up at the stars one more time. Then he lay down on the ground with his backpack under his head and closed his eyes. Tomorrow there would be more road, more practice, more learning, more becoming. He had barely started. Time skip. They called him many things, depending on where you were in the world when you heard his name for the first time. In the small villages along the eastern trade routes, merchants whispered about a blonde demon who could stop your heart without touching you. In the hidden villages, the intelligence files described him simply as an unclassified threat, which was the official way of saying they did not have a category for what he was. In the criminal underground, the name that had settled like dust over everything was short and simple and said in a low voice. The Blood Lord. He was 16 years old, and the world had spent the last 10 years slowly realizing that it had made a very serious mistake. Naruto Uzumaki had grown tall, not enormous, but tall enough, lean and sharp in the way that people who live hard and fight harder tend to get. His blonde hair was longer now, pulled back loosely, and his whisker marks had not faded the way he had briefly hoped they would when he was a child. They were just part of his face, part of what people saw when they looked at him. What they really noticed, though, were his eyes. They had changed somewhere around his 12th year, not in color. They were still blue, the same deep blue they had always been. But the way they sat in his face had shifted. There was a stillness in them that was not natural for a teenager. A flatness that came from years of being the most dangerous thing in every room and knowing it. His group had changed just as much as he had. What had started as 16 rough bandits led by Ryota was now something closer to a small army. 63 members at last count, and not one of them a bandit anymore. Well, not just a bandit. Missing Nin made up the backbone of it now. Shinobi who had fled their villages for one reason or another, some of them criminals, some of them simply people the system had chewed up and discarded, who had eventually crossed paths with the Bloodlord and made the only sensible choice available to them. Several of them were Jonin level. 2 were former Anbu. 1 was a woman who had once been a medical ninja of exceptional skill before her village decided she had done something unforgivable, and she had left before they could punish her for it. They were powerful, they were dangerous, and every single one of them, from the most capable fighter to the newest recruit, had felt Naruto's blood sense inside them at least once. Not as punishment, not usually, just as a reminder, a quiet, unmistakable reminder that the awareness was always there, that he could feel every heartbeat in the camp at any moment he chose to pay attention, that the loyalty he required was not optional. Most of them did not resent it. Some of them even felt safer for it. Strange as that sounds, there is a certain peace in knowing exactly where the most dangerous thing in your world is and whose side it is on. Ryota was still there, older now, lines carved deep into his face, the beard finally trimmed to something more deliberate. He was 51 years old and moved with the careful economy of a man who had survived long enough to stop wasting energy. He had no special abilities. He had no ninja training. What he had was a sharp mind, decades of experience running a group of difficult people, and the fact that he had been the first person on Earth to offer Naruto something to eat without wanting anything terrible in return. Naruto had never forgotten that. He suspected he never would. Ryuta did not give orders to the former Anbu or the Jonin-level fighters. That would have been absurd, and everyone knew it. What he did was manage the day-to-day reality of keeping 63 people fed, housed, and pointed in roughly the same direction. He mediated disputes. He handled logistics. He kept records. He was, in the truest sense, the thing that held the group together in all the small boring ways that made the larger dangerous ways possible. Naruto trusted him in a way he trusted almost nobody else. Not completely, not without reservation, but more than anyone, which made what was coming later matter so much more than it otherwise would have. The 9 Tails had not gone quietly. Naruto had discovered, around his 11th year, that the seal his father had placed on him was not just a cage. It was a door, not one that opened easily, not one that opened without cost, but a door nonetheless. The 9 Tails was ancient and vast and furious in a way that made every human anger Naruto had ever felt seem like a candle held up next to a forest fire. When Naruto first reached through that door deliberately, pressing inward with his consciousness the way he pressed outward with his blood sense, the fox hit him like a wall of red fire. It told him, in a voice that shook something behind Naruto's eyes, that he was nothing. A container, a temporary vessel for something far older and greater than he could understand. It told him to stay on his side of the door and be grateful it allowed him to breathe. Naruto had listened to all of this very calmly. Then he had done something that nobody, in all the centuries of the 9 Tails existing, had apparently ever thought to try. He reached inward with his blood sense. The fox had blood too, or something close enough to it, something that flowed through its enormous spiritual body in rivers of burning chakra, something that had rhythm and pattern and pressure the way blood did, something that responded to the same invisible hands he used on the outside world. He reached into the fox's own internal current and he squeezed. What followed was not a conversation. It was a negotiation conducted entirely in pain, or the spiritual equivalent of it, and it lasted 3 days, during which Naruto barely moved from where he sat and the people in his camp kept a respectful and frightened distance. When it was over, the fox had stopped threatening him. It had not become friendly. It had not forgiven him anything, but it had acknowledged, with the grudging fury of something that had just discovered the shape of its own cage, that Naruto was not simple a container. He was the lock, and the lock had teeth. After that, Naruto could draw on the fox's chakra at will. Not all of it, not the full tidal wave of what lived inside him, but enough that his blood sense extended to nearly half a mile in every direction when he used it. Enough that his physical body became something close to indestructible for short periods. Enough that the things he could do with blood, the things that had already been far beyond anything a normal person could manage, became something else entirely. He could boil blood inside a person's body from 30 feet away. He could pull blood out through the skin, through closed pores, drawing it out in a fine red mist that hung in the air like fog. He had, on one occasion that he did not think about very often, caused every blood vessel in a man's head to rupture at the same moment. That had happened only once, and it had not been an accident, exactly, but it had also been the moment he understood that there was no upper limit to what he was capable of. That the ceiling he had always assumed was above him did not actually exist. He did not use that level of power casually, not because it troubled him, but because what troubled him was simpler and more practical. It was too fast. There was no control in it, and control, always, was the point. The day Jiraiya found him, it was raining. Naruto had known for about 3 miles that someone was following him. The heartbeat was strong and steady, the way experienced ninja maintained it when they were trying not to broadcast their presence, but the range on Naruto's senses was not something a shadow technique could account for. He had felt the man the moment he entered his circle, which by that point extended nearly a quarter mile in every direction on an ordinary day. He did not run. He did not alert the others. He simply kept walking until he reached the clearing he had already decided on, turned around, and waited. Jiraiya stepped out of the trees. He was a big man, white-haired and broad, with the kind of face that had probably been easy to like at some point and still was, underneath everything. He wore his headband tilted in a way that read as casual but was not. His eyes were sharp and careful and taking in everything about Naruto with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for a very long time. He said he had been looking for Naruto for years. Naruto said he knew. Jiraiya blinked. Then he said he was a friend of Naruto's father and that he had come to bring him home. Naruto looked at him for a long moment, not with anger, Not with the hot rushing feeling that word home used to produce in him when he was young and still wanted it to mean something. Just with that flat blue stillness. He asked Jiraiya which home he meant. Jiraiya started to explain. He talked about Konoha, about the people there, about the life Naruto could have, about training and belonging and things that were waiting for him. He talked the way people talk when they genuinely believe the thing they are saying. He was not lying. Naruto could feel his heartbeat. It was steady and sad and earnest in a way that was almost painful to listen to. Naruto let him finish. Then he said no. He said he had no interest in Konoha, and Konoha had made it extremely clear years ago that it had no interest in him, so he considered that matter settled. He said Jiraiya should go back and stay back. Jiraiya said he could not do that. Naruto nodded. He had expected that answer. What happened next lasted about 4 minutes. Jiraiya was exceptional. Naruto understood that clearly within the first 30 seconds. The summoning jutsu was fast and well executed, the toads massive and the impact enough to crater the clearing. Naruto moved through it without summoning anything, without seals, without anything that looked like conventional ninja technique. He moved and he reached and he pressed, feeling Jiraiya's blood through the rain and the disruption of the toads and the chakra in the air, maintaining contact with that familiar rhythm even while everything around them was chaos. He did not go for the kill. He had decided that before the fight started. What he did was systematically and precisely dismantle Jiraiya's ability to keep fighting. A toad dismissed early because the chakra sustaining the contract was interrupted at the source. A jutsu broken before completion because the hands forming the seals suddenly lost their coordination. The blood flow to the relevant muscles altered just enough to ruin the timing. Jiraiya hit the ground twice before he understood that fighting this in a conventional way was not going to work. He stopped. He was breathing hard. His left arm was not working correctly. He looked at Naruto standing in the rain looking back at him, and Naruto watched the man make a calculation behind his eyes. Jiraiya asked why he had not finished it. Naruto said because the message worked better with a messenger. He told Jiraiya to go back to Konoha, to tell whoever was listening, the Hokage, the council, anyone who was paying attention, that Naruto Uzumaki was alive and well and completely uninterested in being retrieved. He said that anyone sent after him would not receive the same consideration Jiraiya was receiving now. He said it plainly and without any heat. Jiraiya looked at him for a long time. Something moved behind the man's eyes that Naruto could not fully read, something that might have been grief or might have been something else. He said Naruto's parents would not have wanted this. Naruto said he was sure they would not have. He said his parents were dead. He said that had been the village's choice too, in its way. And he had stopped holding it against anyone a long time ago because holding things against people was a distraction. He said the only thing he wanted from Konoha was for it to leave him alone. Then he turned and walked back the way he had come. He did not look back. He never looked back. The report Jiraiya brought back to Konoha spread from there. And from Konoha it spread further. The way these things always do. The Blood Lord had defeated Jiraiya of the Sannin, without a single conventional technique. Without summoning, without seals or jutsu or any of the tools that the shinobi world had built its entire understanding of power on top of. He had done it with something that had no name in any standard classification system and that nobody in any intelligence division could fully explain. The hidden villages started dedicating serious resources to finding out exactly what the Bloodlord could do. The Akatsuki, that quiet and terrible organization that had been building itself in the shadows for years, noted the development with the calm interest of people who collected powerful things. Pain, the leader, looked at the report with his strange pale eyes and said nothing for a long time. Then he said the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails had become something that was worth watching carefully. That he was to be located but not approached. Not yet. Itachi Uchiha, who sat in that meeting and said almost nothing as he usually did, looked at the name on the report and filed it away in that perfect terrible memory of his. And in a dark underground laboratory far from any village, a pale man with golden eyes and a snake's smile read his own copy of the report 3 times. Then Orochimaru set down the paper and pressed his fingers together and began to think. You have to understand what Orochimaru wanted, what he had always wanted, more than power or revenge or any of the smaller things that drove smaller people. He wanted to live forever. He had found partial solutions, imperfect ones, bodies that could be swapped, techniques that could extend existence beyond its natural span. But all of it was temporary. All of it required maintenance and workarounds and left gaps that he could feel aching him from the inside even when the outside looked still and preserved. What he needed was something fundamental. something that operated at the level of the body's most basic system. Blood, not blood as a weapon. Blood as a mechanism, the thing that carried everything through a living body. Oxygen, chakra, life itself, moving in reverse through every cell. If someone could control that process from the inside, could alter it at will, could stop the decay that blood carried along with everything else as a body aged. That was the missing piece. That was what he had been looking for, and according to every report he could find, Naruto Uzumaki had been doing exactly that since he was a child. Orochimaru was not foolish enough to approach directly. Not after what happened to Jiraiya. He sent scouts first, then researchers, then quiet people who knew how to stay invisible and watch and record. They tracked the Bloodlord's movements for 3 months and sent back detailed reports that Orochimaru read with growing excitement. He also sent Kabuto, which was what he did when he needed something done correctly. And Kabuto came back and told him that the boy was rarely at the main camp. That he moved constantly, sometimes alone, sometimes with a small group, ranging over wide areas for days at a time. That the camp itself was large and well organized, but that the majority of its defenses centered on its leader. Without its leader, Kabuto said, the camp was formidable but manageable. Orochimaru smiled. He said that was very useful information. He said to prepare. Naruto was 3 hours from camp when it happened. He felt it from that distance, which meant it had already been going on for some time before his senses even registered the edge of it. A mass disruption at the far limit of his range. Too many heartbeats and chaos all at once. The specific frantic rhythm of people who were fighting and losing and knew it. He was running before he finished processing what he was feeling. The Nine Tails chakra came up without him calling it, burning orange at the edges of his movement, and the trees blurred past him at a speed that had nothing human left in it. He felt Ryouta's heartbeat when he was still a mile out, fast and shallow and wrong in a way that clenched something deep in his chest. He ran faster. He arrived to smoke and silence. The camp was not burning. That was the first thing Naruto noticed, and it was worse than if it had been. Orochimaru had not come here to destroy the place. He had come here to deliver a message. The structures were mostly standing. The fires were small and already dying out on their own. What was gone was the sound of 63 people living their lives. There were bodies everywhere. His people, the Jonin-level fighters, the former Anbu, the woman who had been a medical ninja, all of them. Some of them had put up real fights. He could see the evidence of that in the scorched earth and the shattered trees where jutsu had landed in clusters. But the results were the same no matter which direction he looked. He walked through it slowly. His blood sense stretched in every direction, reading the camp the only way he had ever read anything. Through what was alive and what was not. He found Ryota near the center, propped against a tree like the old man had refused to fall down even at the end. He was still breathing, barely. Naruto knelt in front of him and reached out immediately with his blood sense, pressing into Ryota the way he pressed into everything, feeling the current of him, looking for what was wrong and where it was and whether it could be fixed. He found the poison almost instantly. It was not like a wound. A wound was clean. A wound was just damage, and damage had shape and edges, and the blood around it behaved in ways that made sense. This was different. This was something introduced into the blood itself, something that moved with it and spread through it and was already in places that Naruto could not reach without risk of making it worse. He tried anyway. He pushed blood away from the affected areas, tried to slow the spread, tried to isolate it the way he might isolate pressure in a vessel. He had never done this before. He had spent years learning how to hurt people with blood and almost no time at all thinking about how to save them with it. He felt the limits of that gap now, completely, in a way he would not forget. The poison was too far in. He had arrived too late by maybe half an hour, maybe less. Orochimaru had timed it carefully, which meant he had known when Naruto left the camp and roughly when he would return, which meant this had all been planned down to the minute. Naruto kept trying anyway. He was still trying when Ryota opened his eyes. The old man looked at him. Even now there was something steady in those eyes. Something that had been there since the first day on the road, when a 4-year-old with a backpack had appeared out of nowhere and sat down at his fire and changed the direction of everything. He told Naruto to stop. Naruto did not stop. Ryota said his name, not the Bloodlord, not boy, just Naruto, quiet and direct, the way he had said it since the beginning when nobody else in the world was saying it at all. Naruto stopped. Ryota said the snake man had come looking for him. Said he asked where Naruto was and when he would be back, over and over, to every person who was still standing. He said the snake man had not seemed angry. He had seemed patient, like a man who was not trying to win a fight but trying to start one somewhere else. Naruto said he understood. Ryudo looked at him for a moment longer. Then he said the thing he had apparently decided to say and had been holding on to while he waited. He said he knew the boy Naruto had been when they met on that road. He said he had watched what that boy became, year by year, piece by piece, and he had never once regretted any of it. Not one day. He said whatever Naruto did next, he should do it all the way. No hesitation, no pulling back. He said it the way a man says his last thing. The breathing stopped a few minutes after that. Naruto stayed where he was for a long time. He did not move, he did not speak. He just knelt there in the middle of the ruined camp with his hands still pressed against the ground where Ryudo had been, like some part of him had not caught up yet to the fact that there was nothing left to reach for. When he finally stood up, his face was calm, not peaceful, calm in the way that things get calm right before they become something much worse. He reached out with his blood sense again, wider this time, all the way to the edge of his range and then further, drawing on the 9 tails to push past it. He was reading the ground, the direction of movement, the traces of chakra that lingered in the air after powerful techniques. He was reading the story of what had happened here the same way he read everything. And right at the eastern edge of camp, he found something that was not a trace. It was deliberate, a message, practically, left on a flat stone where anyone looking would find it. A single black snake scale, perfectly placed, with a small scroll tucked beneath it. He opened the scroll. It contained coordinates, a location 2 days east in the hill country. And below the coordinates, in Orochimaru's precise and elegant handwriting, 4 words. I will be waiting. Naruto folded the scroll. He put it in his pocket. He looked at the camp one last time, at what had been his home for years, at the people who had been the closest thing he had to a world. He buried every single one of them, putting his people to rest. He did not cry. Another feeling was boiling inside of him. Then he turned east and started walking. He did not run this time. There was no urgency in his steps. Just direction, just the cold, absolute certainty of someone who has already decided how a thing ends and is simply moving toward it. Orochimaru's base was built into the side of a hill, the way his places always were, deep and layered and full of the particular kind of dark that comes from underground spaces lit by flickering torches. Naruto felt it from almost a mile out. The chakra signatures inside were numerous and some of them were strong. He counted them carefully as he approached. He also felt the one waiting outside. The young Uchiha was positioned on a rocky ledge above the main entrance, which was either a guard post or an ambush depending on how you looked at it. His chakra was tight and burning and Naruto had felt enough descriptions of sharingan users to recognize the signature without needing to see the eyes. Naruto did not slow down. The Uchiha dropped from the ledge and landed in the path ahead of him. He was about 16, maybe 17, with dark hair that fell forward and dark eyes that were already shifted to red. He was well trained. Naruto could see that clearly just from the way he stood, the weight distribution, the position of his hands. Someone had spent years making this boy into a weapon. He said Naruto should not go in there. He said Orochimaru was his to deal with. Naruto looked at him. He said he did not know who this person was and did not particularly need to. He said the only thing behind that door that had anything to do with him was Orochimaru, and if the Uchiha was planning to get in the way of that, he should think carefully about the next few seconds. The Uchiha's eyes shifted fully to Sharingan, 3 tomo in each eye, spinning, locking onto Naruto with that famous gaze that could read movement before it happened. He moved fast, genuinely fast, the kind of speed that came from real talent pushed hard for years. He covered the distance between them in a fraction of a second with a strike aimed at Naruto's throat. Naruto turned his blood sense on him. He did not try to stop the Uchiha's movement. He simply felt the blood in the boy's legs, the specific vessels running along the outside of his left knee, and he constricted them. Not hard, not the way he would do it to an enemy he intended to finish. Just enough. The Uchiha's left leg buckled mid-stride. The strike went wide. He hit the ground shoulder first and rolled, coming back up fast, but the left leg was not responding correctly and he knew it. He looked at his own leg with the expression of someone who has just encountered a problem they do not have a solution for. He tried twice more, different angles, different approaches, the Sharingan clearly working to identify a pattern in what Naruto was doing. There was no pattern to find. Naruto did not move the same way twice because he was not responding to the attacks. He was responding to the blood, which was always ahead of the movement, always the first thing to shift when a decision was made. The third attempt ended with the Uchiha on one knee, his right arm locked at the elbow. The blood flow in the joint disrupted enough that forcing it would cause real damage. Naruto looked at him. He said he was going inside now. He said the boy should be gone before he came back out. He walked past him and through the entrance. He heard the Uchiha get to his feet behind him. He felt his heartbeat, furious and proud and reluctantly calculating. And then he felt the footsteps moving away. Not inside, away. Naruto walked into the dark. What followed inside that base was not something that could be called a battle. Not cleanly. The guards came first, in groups, because that was how these places worked. Naruto moved through them the way he moved through everything, without technique, without hand seals, with only the reach of his senses and the precision of what he could do with that reach. Men dropped in his path like their bodies had simply decided to stop. Some of them were unconscious before they hit the ground. Some of them were not. Naruto did not particularly distinguish between those two outcomes tonight. He found Kabuto in a large open chamber near the base of the structure, standing in the center of it with chakra scalpels already formed at both hands, his gray eyes flat and professional behind his glasses. He had clearly known Naruto was coming from the moment he stepped through the entrance. He had prepared. Kabuto was precise and he was calm, and he was one of the most capable medical ninja alive, which meant he understood the body the way very few people did, and he knew exactly where to hit and how to make it count. The problem was that Naruto understood the body in a way that went further than anything medical training could reach. Kabuto's techniques required contact, or very close to it. They required getting inside the reach of whatever Naruto was doing, and Naruto's reach had no fixed distance. The fight lasted about 90 seconds. Kabuto did not get back up. Naruto stood in the silence of the chamber for a moment. Then he walked deeper into the base. There is a version of anger that is loud, that screams and breaks things and makes a lot of noise and burns itself out fast. Most people have felt that kind. Most people understand it. And then there is the other kind. The kind that is quiet. The kind that moves slow and certain, like something that has already decided on its ending and is simply walking toward it. The kind that does not shake or tremble or lose focus. The kind that is so cold and so complete that it stops being emotion at all and becomes something closer to a law of the world. That was what walked into Orochimaru's base that night. Not a boy, not even the Bloodlord, that title the world had given the dangerous thing Naruto had become. Something older and heavier than either of those. Something that had been sitting at the bottom of him since he was 3 years old in an alley, since he was 4 walking out of a village that had never wanted him, since he knelt beside an old man in the ruins of the only home he had ever built and felt the poison moving through the blood he could not stop in time. That was what walked through the door, and Orochimaru, who had spent decades studying every dangerous thing in the world, had no idea what he was looking at. He had prepared. That needs to be said, because Orochimaru did not make small preparations. He had read every report on the Bloodlord that existed. He had studied the accounts from the Jiraiya encounter. He had run calculations on what a blood manipulation ability at that scale could and could not do, and he had built his defenses around the gaps he identified. He had modified the stone of the base itself, woven chakra suppression materials into the walls to disrupt the kind of extended sensing he knew Naruto relied on. He had positioned his best people at specific points throughout the structure. He had layered his own body with redundant systems, backups on top of backups, every escape route reinforced. He had been confident. He had been, in the way that very intelligent people sometimes are, completely wrong. The suppression materials in the walls slowed Naruto's blood sense by about 4 seconds. 4 seconds of reduced range, which meant instead of feeling everything in the base from 50 meters away, he felt it from 40. It made no practical difference whatsoever. He still knew where every person was. He still knew which ones were frightened and which ones were trying not to be and which ones had decided to run the moment something went wrong. The best people Orochimaru had positioned throughout the structure hit the floor before Naruto reached the third corridor. Not in a way that involved a fight. Not in a way that involved any kind of exchange. They simply stopped working. One by one, in the order Naruto reached them with his sense, they went down. Some of them never understood what had happened. Some of them were still conscious and simply could not make their bodies respond, lying on the stone floor looking at the ceiling while Naruto walked past them without a second glance. By the time Naruto reached the lower levels, the base had gone completely silent. Orochimaru heard the silence spreading toward him like a wave and felt, for possibly the first time in a very long time, something he had almost forgotten the shape of. Fear. He launched his techniques the moment Naruto came through the door. not out of panic, out of strategy. Strike first, strike fast. Do not give the Bloodlord time to establish whatever it was he established that made conventional fighting impossible. The snake sannin moved with the speed and precision of someone who had spent decades refining every technique to its absolute sharpest edge. Massive walls of snakes erupted from the floor and the walls simultaneously. The room itself began to shift, the stone responding to the chakra he poured into it, trying to reshape the space, take away angles, force a close environment. Naruto walked through it, not around it, through it. The snakes that hit the space around him did something wrong. They slowed, not because of any visible barrier, not because of any jutsu Orochimaru could identify, but because the blood that ran through each of them and kept them moving was no longer moving the way blood moved when something was alive and working correctly. They went limp and heavy and dropped to the ground before they reached him, and the ones behind them did the same, and it happened so fast that within seconds the floor was covered in still snakes and Naruto was standing 10 feet away looking at Orochimaru like the whole thing had been mildly inconvenient. Orochimaru tried something else, then something else after that, then something he had never tried on anyone because he had never needed to. A technique he had developed specifically for enemies who could negate conventional approaches. Naruto reached out with his sense and found Orochimaru's blood. It was strange blood, modified, built and rebuilt over years of experiments conducted on his own body, pushed into configurations that normal human blood was never meant to take. Orochimaru had made himself into something that was not quite human anymore in the hope that this would make him harder to kill. What it had actually done was make him more interesting to Naruto's power. Not safer, more interesting, like a lock with extra mechanisms that someone had added specifically to make it harder to open, without understanding that the person trying to open it did not use keys. He closed his hand. Orochimaru stopped mid-technique and made a sound that was not a word. He looked at his hands. They were shaking in a way they had no reason to shake. Something was wrong inside them, something he could not see or identify but could absolutely feel, a wrongness that was spreading up through his wrists and into his forearms in a way that made his perfect memory immediately begin searching for any record of anything that had ever felt like this. It found nothing, because nothing had ever felt like this before. He tried to shed the body. That was the core of everything he had, the deepest level of his survival, the last line that had always held. He initiated the process, began the internal sequence that would pull him out of the damaged container and into the next stage. Naruto felt him do it. He felt the blood moving in the specific pattern that initiated the sequence, felt the direction of it and the destination it was heading toward. He redirected it, not gently, not carefully, with the full weight of every piece of the Nine Tails chakra he had learned to access. He took hold of the current that was supposed to carry Orochimaru out of his damaged body and he turned it. He pushed it wrong. He forced it into directions it was not built to travel and held it there while the pressure built in the spaces between Orochimaru's modified cells, in the walls of the modified vessels, in all the places that the extra mechanisms Orochimaru had added to himself had created without understanding what they were actually adding. Orochimaru had believed, right up until this moment, that he had studied the Bloodlord thoroughly, that he understood the shape of the ability, that he had found the limits of it and built his plan around those limits. He understood now, in the way that understanding comes when everything you assume turns out to be wrong, that he had not studied Naruto at all. He had studied the reports of things Naruto had chosen to do in situations that did not require everything he had. He had studied the ceiling of what a blood manipulation ability was supposed to be, and built his plan around that, without ever considering that Naruto had spent years pushing past ceilings. He tried to speak. He had always been good with words. Words had gotten him out of situations that violence could not. Naruto looked at him with those flat blue eyes and said one thing. He said the old man's name. Just the name, quietly, without decoration. Then he turned the pressure up. The sounds that came out of that room over the next several minutes were not something that anyone in the base would later be able to describe clearly. Not because they were not listening, because there is a specific kind of sound that the mind refuses to file properly. That it keeps at arm's length and processes only partially, because full processing would require holding on to something it does not want to hold. Orochimaru had spent a lifetime building himself into something that could not be destroyed. Into something that would persist no matter what happened to the container it lived in. He had been so focused on the destination of that project that he had not spent nearly enough time considering what it would feel like if someone understood the project from the inside and chose to work against it directly. Blood does not negotiate. It does not reason or appeal or offer alternatives. When you control it completely, when you can feel every single drop of it and tell it exactly what to do with the certainty of someone who has been doing this since they were a child, it simply obeys. The snake techniques Orochimaru was so famous for required blood to function. The body transfer techniques required blood to function. The cell regeneration that had kept him alive through injuries that should have killed him decades ago required blood to function. Naruto took each of those systems apart in order. Precisely, not because he needed to be precise to finish this. Because he wanted Orochimaru to understand exactly what was happening to him for exactly as long as possible. It took 7 minutes. At the end of the 7 minutes, the room was very quiet and Orochimaru of the sannin, who had survived things that the rest of the world had believed were unsurvivable, was not in it anymore. Not in any form, not in any configuration. There was nothing left to reconstruct from. Naruto stood in the center of the room and breathed slowly. The red of the 9 tails was still burning at the edges of him. He let it pull back by degrees, the way he always did, carefully, making sure the boundary between what was his and what was the fox's stayed exactly where he needed it. His hands were completely still. He was walking back through the base toward the exit when his sense caught the heartbeat. He almost missed it. That was the thing. It was so quiet and so careful, like whoever it belonged to had spent a long time learning to make as little impression on the world as possible, that it registered at the edge of his awareness as barely more than background. A small, muffled pulse behind a heavy door in one of the side corridors he had already walked past once. He stopped. He pressed his senses against the door. Alive, definitely alive, no threat. Something about the heartbeat was strange though, not wrong the way injury or sickness made things wrong, but strange in a way he could not immediately name. Like the rhythm of it was doing something slightly different from what heartbeats usually did. Like it was aware in some way that most heartbeats were not. He opened the door. The room was cold. It had the feel of a space that had been used for a long time for things that left an impression in the walls. There were notes everywhere, on papers and on boards, the kind of extensive record-keeping that Orochimaru applied to anything he considered a serious subject of study. On a low cot against the far wall, not bound but not free either, a girl sat looking at him. She had been sitting in the dark because there was no light source in the room and she had clearly not moved to create one. Her hair was dark and cut short and practical. She was thin, the kind of thin that came from years of institutional meals that kept a person functional rather than comfortable. She looked about 15, but her eyes were the thing. Dark and very still, and focused on him in a way that had a quality he did not fully understand. Not calculating, not frightened, not relieved, not any of the things he expected from someone sitting in a dark room in a place that had just been very loud and then gone very quiet. She was just looking at him, and she said, before he could say anything, that he had come from a place with a lot of grief in it. He looked at her. She said she was sorry about whoever he lost. She said she could feel it. She said she could feel most things, if she paid attention, and that she had been paying very close attention tonight. He asked her what she meant. She was quiet for a moment, like she was deciding how much to explain. Then she said it was like hearing a sound, except it was not sound. She said she could feel the emotional weight of things, of people. She said it came in at the edges of her awareness whenever she was around living creatures, the shape of what they were feeling pushed up against her whether she wanted it or not. She said it had been like that since she was small and she had learned to manage it but she had never learned to turn it off. She said Orochimaru had found her because she could also project it. That she could take what she felt from one person and push it outward, reflect it back or amplify it into the people around her. She said she had done it by accident twice as a child and both times it had caused enough distress in everyone nearby that her village had decided she was a problem they did not want. She said Orochimaru had decided she was useful for the same reason, which was not much of an improvement. She said she had almost no control over the projection, just the sensing, and that Orochimaru had been studying whether control could be developed and what the ceiling of that would look like if it could. Naruto looked at the notes on the walls. He looked at the records that had her name at the top. He looked at her sitting in the dark in a cold room that had been her world for what the notes suggested was about 6 years. He was not sure what he felt. That was unusual for him. Usually he knew exactly what he felt about a situation and acted on it with very little noise in between. He thought about 63 people who were not alive anymore. He thought about the camp that had been built over years and was now a place nobody would go back to. He thought about the fire at the end of every day for years, the same faces around it, the particular comfort of the same faces around a fire at the end of every day. He thought about how her room in the laboratory had notes on the walls with her name at the top, and he thought about how Ryata's fire had been the first place he had ever sat without the circle of empty space opening up around him. He was not sure why he said what he said next. He was not sure it was the right reason, or even a good reason, or anything other than the honest truth of where he was standing in that moment. He said she could come with him. She looked at him. He could not tell what she was reading from him right now, and he was not sure he wanted to know. He was not sure his grief was something he wanted identified and named by a stranger in a dark room. But she nodded. She stood up. She was steadier on her feet than he expected from someone who had been sitting in the dark. She said her name was Aoi. He said his name was Naruto. She nodded again, like she already knew, which she probably did. He turned and walked out of the room. She followed him without hesitation, through the corridor and up through the levels of the base and out into the cold night air. Neither of them spoke for a long time after that. There was nothing that needed to be said yet. There was just the road ahead and the dark around it and two people walking in the same direction for reasons that were not entirely clear to either of them. That was enough. For now, that was enough. Time skip. 6 years. That is how long it took for the elemental nations to stop arguing about what Naruto Uzumaki was and accept the only description that fit. Not a missing nin. Missing nin were people who had left their villages and done things worth punishing. That word implied the villages still had some authority over him, some standing to define what he was and was not. They did not. Not a monster. Monster was a word people used for things they believed could eventually be stopped. The bingo book entry was 3 lines long. Most entries were paragraphs, names, physical descriptions, known techniques, bounties, thread levels. His entry had none of those things. It had 3 lines, and those 3 lines said the following: do not engage, do not pursue. If encountered, leave the area immediately and report the location to your village. No bounty. They had stopped listing 1 2 years ago, because no bounty in the world was enough to make anyone try to collect it, and listing 1 gave people the idea that collecting it was possible. That was what 6 years had done. In those 6 years, Naruto had done things that rearranged how the shinobi world thought about power. He had learned to push his blood manipulation so deep into the architecture of living things that the line between manipulation and creation started to blur. He could feel the exact structure of a wound, every broken vessel, every piece of damage, and he could put it back. Not with medical chakra or any technique that required training or hand seals. Just with the same hands he had always used, extended through his senses, rebuilding what was broken from the inside. He had brought Aloy back from the edge of death once, in the early years, and the experience of feeling a life come back into proper flow under his direction had told him something about his power that he had not fully understood before. There was no ceiling. There had never been one. He could harden his own blood to something beyond iron, push it through his skin in layers that turned the outside of his body into something that laughed at anything a conventional weapon could do. He could extend that hardened blood outward as weapons, long curved shapes or dense battering forces, and move them the way he moved everything, with thought and nothing else. He could feel the natural cycle of things in the world around him, the water in the earth, the iron in the rocks, everything that shared the distant cousin relationship with blood that gave him a point of contact if he pressed hard enough. And then there was the 9 tails. The fox had stopped fighting him somewhere in the 3rd year, not because it had forgiven him anything, because it had made a calculation and the calculation had come out in favor of being pointed in a direction rather than being pressed in every direction at once. It was ancient and it was furious and it had no love for the boy it lived inside. But it was also, underneath all of that rage, intelligent. And intelligence, eventually, recognizes when the argument is over. Naruto did not need the fox's permission. He had demonstrated that clearly enough. But with the fox's chakra flowing freely rather than being taken by force, the things he could do with his blood power scaled into territory that had no existing framework for description. Mountains moved when he decided they should move. The ground itself responded to him when he chose to address it. He had once, to settle a disagreement with a small army that had decided to test the bingo book's advice, lifted the blood from the soil of the earth, from every living root and creature in a radius he did not bother to measure, and held it above the ground like a red sky until the disagreement was settled. The disagreement had been settled very quickly. That was the world Naruto moved through now, a world that had looked at him for over 20 years and made decisions about what he was and was not, and had been wrong at every step, and now knew it. Aloy was 21 years old and she had grown into her power in the years since the base. The sensing had always been there, strong and clear, an awareness of the emotional weight of everything alive around her that she had learned to read the way other people read faces. She knew when someone was lying before they finished the sentence. She knew when someone was planning something before they decided to do it. She knew the emotional texture of a room the moment she walked into it. Every hidden feeling and suppressed thought broadcasting itself to her like sound she could not turn off. The projection was different. That had taken years. Orochimaru had been right that control was developable, which was perhaps the only accurate thing about his notes on her. It had come slowly and painfully, and through experiments she had conducted on herself with the same patience she had learned to apply to everything in her life. But it had come. She could push now, not just reflect back what she felt from others. She could generate it from inside herself and send it outward in waves that expanded until they covered whatever area she chose. Fear was the easiest, terror that had no source and no explanation and hit people at a level below thought. She could make a trained shinobi freeze in place with the same certainty a child felt in the dark, and she could hold it there for as long as she needed to. She had not yet found the limit of the range. She had not yet found the limit of the intensity. She was not sure those limits existed in any meaningful sense. She stood now at the edge of the overlook above the valley where they had made their current home, watching the morning with that particular stillness she had developed over years of being around someone who moved through the world like a law of physics. The marks on her forearms were more visible than they had been. They had spread slightly, the geometric patterns reaching up toward her elbows, which she understood as the ability developing further and had stopped worrying about. She had stopped worrying about most things. There was a version of Aoi in the life she might have had if things had gone differently, who would have been troubled by what she had watched happen over 6 years. Who would have found a way to hold the things she had seen and felt at a distance, to put limits on what she participated in, to maintain some boundary between herself and the person she was with. That version had not survived the land of rain. When pain had taken her, she had known from the first moment that Naruto would come. That was not hope or faith. That was the knowledge that came from years of feeling someone the way she felt him, from understanding the structure of what he was in a way that went past words. She had known he would come and she had waited. She had not known what coming would look like. She had underestimated it, which was the last time she had underestimated anything. He had gone through that village the way water goes through something that cannot hold it. She had felt everything from her cell in Nagato's tower, every life in the land of rain. She had felt them go out one by one and then in groups and then all at once, a silence that spread from the edge of her senses inward until the entire village was just quiet water and stone and nothing living in it. She had felt his grief through the walls, and his fury, and underneath both of those things, the specific and terrible steadiness of someone who had decided that the world had used up its last chance to touch what was his. She had never had anything in her life that considered her worth that. She had been expelled and experimented on and used as a tool by people who only saw the ability and never the person attached did. She had spent 6 years walking beside someone who moved through the world like he owned it and who had, without ever making a speech about it or asking for anything in return, simply made it clear that what was his was kept. She was his. She knew that. She had decided, somewhere in the years between then and now, that she did not mind. She heard him come up behind her and she did not turn around. She said that someone was coming. 2 of them, a long way out but moving with intention. He stood beside her and looked out over the valley. He said he knew. The masked man had been patient for a long time. That was his particular gift, patience in the long game. The willingness to build something over decades and absorb setbacks without abandoning the destination. The rinnegan had been a setback. Naruto had destroyed Nagato's eyes before he could take them, which meant the cornerstone of the plan, the technique that would have pulled the whole world under a single shared dream, was gone. He had spent 2 years adjusting, then 2 more years building something new around the gap. The minds he had assembled, the greatest living experts in sealing theory and ocular jutsu and cellular reconstruction, working alongside what remained of the Zetsu collective, had produced something that should not have been possible that quickly, but they got it done. With the cells of Hashirama Senju and the cells of Uchiha, more than one, they were able to replicate the process a lot faster in creating the rinnegan. But the eyes were simply too powerful for him to take both of them, so he gave one of them to his number 2, the one that was loyal to his plan, loyal to the cause, Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke had not questioned this. Sasuke had been thoroughly invested in the dream by then, the promise of a world where the massacre had not happened, where Itachi had not done what he did. He had killed Danzo with the single-minded focus of someone who had no other purpose left, and burned his last connection to the leaf in the process, and attached himself to the masked man's vision with the faith of someone who had nothing else to believe in. They came to the valley together. the masked man moving through his space-time technique in a flickering way that had made him nearly untouchable to conventional opponents. Sasuke with the rinnegan active, 6 Tomo turning in the pale lavender of eyes that should not have existed. Naruto was standing in the middle of the valley floor when they arrived. He looked at the masked man for a moment. He looked at Sasuke, then he said Aoi should go inside. She did not argue. She turned and walked back toward the structure on the ridge without looking back. That was trust, and she knew it, and she would wait. After years of waiting for the rinnegan, they finally had everything they desired. The only thing they needed now was Naruto, the power of the 9 tails. They had already knew where he was the entire time, and now they were here to take the power inside of him. What followed was not something that the shinobi world had a category for. They would talk about it for years and still not fully agree on what had happened in that valley, because the accounts that survived were from people who had been far away and could only describe what they had seen from a distance, which was mostly light and sound and a trembling in the earth that went on for longer than it had any right to. The masked man went first because he understood, at least partially, what Naruto was. He did not try to talk. He did not threaten or explain his plan. He used the space-time technique immediately, slipping out of the physical space of the valley and coming back in behind Naruto at an angle that had never failed to work on anyone. Naruto's blood sense did not operate in the physical space the way normal sensing did. He felt the masked man moving through the dimensional gap the same way he felt blood moving through a body. He felt the location of him before he arrived. He reached into the point of return, to the specific space where the man would step back through, and he pressed. The masked man came back through into the physical world and immediately discovered that something was wrong with his arm. The blood in it was not moving correctly. It was not following the instructions his body was sending it. He tried to phase again, to step back into the gap, and found that the technique required a specific chakra pattern flowing through his right hand that his right hand was currently not capable of producing. He had made the error that Orochimaru had made. He had thought about Naruto's ability as a thing that worked on the outside of people. Something that grabbed and squeezed. He had thought his dimensional movement would take him outside the reach of it. He had not thought about the fact that the blood was inside him regardless of where he went. Sasuke attacked from the opposite angle at the same moment, and this was genuinely the most dangerous part of the encounter, because the rinnegan was real and the techniques available through it were real, and Sasuke was not a normal user of them. He had spent months learning what he could do with the eyes, and he was fast and he was precise, and the gravitational technique he used first would have crushed most things. Naruto hardened the blood under his skin and the blood that ran along the surface of his body and the network of vessels that traced every inch of him, and the gravitational force hit something that was not quite a body anymore, something denser and more structured than flesh had any right to be. He moved through it, not easily. It pressed against him and he felt the weight of it and acknowledged it and kept moving. He reached Sasuke in 3 steps and put one hand on the side of his face. He did not crush anything. He did not destroy anything. He pressed his sense into the rinnegan, felt the artificial construction of it. He immediately stopped the blood flow, removing all connection within Sasuke visual patterns. Sasuke couldn't see anything anymore. Naruto twisted the blood vessels. The Uchiha backed away as Naruto looked towards him. Naruto slit his own palm. It opened as blood rushed out. He proceeded to rip his crystallized blood through Sasuke's chest. Quick and easy, Sasuke collapsed on the ground, the blood sword buried in his chest. All of that training, all of that control, he couldn't understand how could he be defeated so quickly. What was this monster? Then he turned back to the masked man. That took longer. The space-time ability was a genuine complication, not because it could protect him but because every time he slipped dimensions it reset the contact Naruto had established on his blood, required re-establishing the reach each time he came back through. It was like trying to hold something that kept changing shape. He stopped trying to hold it. Instead, he pressed his blood sense through the dimensional gaps themselves, which should not have been possible and probably was not possible without the 9 tails pouring its chakra into the reach, extending it past any boundary that normal space operated by. He found the blood in the gap. He found it moving through the dimensional space the same as it moved anywhere else, because blood did not care about dimensions, blood just flowed wherever it was. He held it. The masked man came back through one final time and stayed through. He did not choose to. He simply could not phase again. The blood was being held in a configuration that did not allow the chakra pattern the technique required. He was standing in the valley floor looking at Naruto and understanding, in the way that very intelligent people understand things when the understanding comes too late to be useful, exactly what he had miscalculated. You people seem to not understand what I am truly capable of." Naruto walked towards him. The masked man was unable to move. There was no dimension that he could slip into. Naruto tore the mask off his face and reached. He ripped out the rinnegan eye out of his socket. Naruto then raised him in the air with 2 fingers. The masked man body swelled and convulsed. Swell and swell until he exploded, blood showering the place. Naruto moved towards Sasuke, still gasping for breath, slowly dying. He did not care one bit as he removed Sasuke's rinnegan. Naruto held the both of them in his hands, realizing how powerful they were. The 2 rinnegan, sitting in his palm, still active, still turning, the light in them picking up the morning. He could feel the depth in them even through his palm, feel the way they extended into the world at a level that was different from anything he had accessed before. He pressed his senses into them the way he pressed his senses into everything. He felt the structure, he felt where they were built to connect. He felt what they could do, the pull and push of gravitational techniques, the pathways of summoning, the deepest of them all, the technique that could give life back to the dead. He thought about Ryota for a moment, then he put the eyes where they belonged. The pain was immediate and total and he did not make a sound. He held completely still and let the blood in his own eye sockets manage the integration, directing the vessels, guiding the connections, doing what he had learned to do with his own body over years of practice. It took several minutes. When it was done, the lavender and the blue coexisted in a way that should not have been anatomically possible and was. He looked at the world through both sets of eyes at once and the world looked very different. He looked up at the ridge where the structure was. Aloy was standing at the overlook. She had come out when the valley went quiet. She was looking down at him and even from that distance he could see the stillness in her, the waiting. He said she could come down now. She came down the slope without rushing, the way she did everything, with the particular economy of movement that had developed over years of living beside someone who did not waste anything. She stopped in front of him and looked at his eyes. She looked at the rinnegan for a long moment. Then she looked at him, at the face beneath the eyes, at the thing that had been there since the beginning that had nothing to do with technique or power. She said his name, just that. He said there was nothing left that could make her hide. He said that was done. He said they were done hiding from the world entirely, both of them, because the world was going to have to arrange itself around the fact of them now. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said she knew. She said she had felt this coming for a long time. She said the emotional weight of the entire elemental nations had been shifting for years, like a tide going out, making room for something. He asked her what it felt like from where she stood. She thought about it. She said it felt like silence before something very large speaks. He nodded. What came after was not a war. Wars required 2 sides. Naruto moved through the elemental nations the way he had moved through that valley. Without urgency, without anger, mostly, just with direction. Leaders who had spent years hoping he would stay away from their borders found him standing in their halls without having gone through any door they controlled. The ones who tried to fight gave their people an education in the distance between being powerful and being whatever Naruto had become. The ones who immediately understood the situation and made the reasonable choice found that the reasonable choice was not particularly painful. The bingo book entry changed. It became simply a name and 2 words beneath it. Do not. Aoi walked beside him through all of it. Her ability had continued to grow in the way it had been growing for years, the range expanding, the precision increasing. She could hold an entire city in a specific emotional state now if she chose to, could smooth a capitulation or deepen a hesitation or make the specific fear that lives beneath pride rise up through it until pride had nothing left to stand on. She did not always use it. Sometimes she simply walked beside him and let his presence do the work, which it usually did. She had no country. She had never had one. She had a village that had expelled her and a laboratory that had owned her and then 6 years of road and blood and the slow construction of something that the world did not have a name for yet. She was not unhappy. She had examined that question carefully, the way she examined most things. She had looked at the life she was living and measured it against any alternative she could envision and found that the alternatives all contained versions of herself that were smaller and quieter and further from being seen. She was seen. That was the thing. She was seen completely. The ability and the strangeness and the parts of herself that had made every other place she had ever been decide she was a problem. He had seen all of it from the first night in the cold dark room and he had said come with me and meant all of it, not just the useful parts. That was not a small thing. She had decided it was not a small thing and she intended to keep deciding that for as long as there was a decision to make. Naruto stood at the edge of the world's oldest mountain range and looked out at the elemental nations spread below him. The nine tails moved inside him like weather, vast and old and present in the way it had been present since the beginning. It did not speak. It had learned, over years, that speaking changed nothing. But its chakra moved through him freely now, genuinely freely, because there was no more resistance worth the energy of maintaining. The rinnegan pulled at the edges of things he could sense, layers of the world that had been invisible before. It was not fully integrated yet. That would take more time. He was patient. He had always been patient in the ways that mattered, even when he was small and angry and the village was loud around him. He thought about a boy who had walked out of Konoha in the dark at 4 years old with a backpack and a knife and no destination. He thought about a fire beside a road and a man who had put food in front of him without asking for anything. He thought about everything that had grown from those two things. He was not that boy anymore. That boy had wanted to be seen, to matter, to take up the space in the world that every living thing deserved and had been denied. He had gotten that. He had gotten it and kept going, past it, into territory that had no name yet. He was not particularly troubled by what he had become. He had stopped expecting himself to be the hero a long time ago. Heroes were people the story was kind to. He had been given a different story and he had made different choices and the world was going to be a different place because of it. Behind him he could feel Aoi, her heartbeat in the specific emotional texture she carried, the particular warmth of someone who has decided to be exactly where they are. He did not need his sense to feel her. He could have felt her without any ability at all. The world was quiet below him, not the quiet of emptiness, the quiet of something that has understood the shape of what it is dealing with and is waiting to learn what comes next. He would tell it, in time. He would tell it clearly and completely and it would listen. He was not the village's monster. He was not the bingo book's warning. He was not a Jinchuriki or a weapon or a vessel or any of the things the world had tried to fit him into since the night he was born. He was Naruto Uzumaki. He was in his early 20s. He had no master and no village and no leash of any kind. And the world, all of it, from the smallest village to the oldest hidden institution, was going to learn what that meant. He turned away from the mountain's edge. He walked back to where she was waiting. And together, without hurry, they went forward into the world they had made. The end.
So that was 8 more movies and series to come. I hope you guys enjoy. Don't forget to go ahead and comment your ideas down below. I'm out for now. See you guys soon. Peace, guys.